film nerds, Leah here, and welcome back to my series Editor's Corner, where we break down some really impactful scenes from films across the genres from the perspective of a film editor. Are you just gonna sit there and drink coffee? Okay, great, awesome. As you can probably tell from my setup here, today we're going to be talking about one of my personal favorite uses of split screen in modern cinema, the expectation versus reality scene from 500 Days of Summer. While this effect is really fun to use and she's clearly not really adding much to this particular setup, let's just stick to one side, shall we? And that's my segue into when using split screen is simply a stylistic choice and when it is used as an impactful narrative tool. But before we get into discussing what makes split screen such an effective narrative tool, let's look at the uses of split screen in art and cinema. Much of cinematography has been influenced by famous paintings throughout history. The use of split screen is no different. The concept of triptychs was one of the main painterly techniques that influenced the split screen in cinema. Some of the first known uses of triptych paintings to convey stories were found in churches in the Middle Ages, often telling the stories of the Bible visually. Triptychs feature a main central image, flanked on both sides by two or more generally related images. Traditionally, the split screen was made with the optical printer, which rephotographed different strips of film that could then be put together. The optical printer was also used for fade-ins, fade-outs, matte effects, and others. One of the first early uses of split screen can be found all the way back in 1898 by French magician and father of special effects Georges Méliès, aka the Cinemagician. While Méliès is the origin of many special effects used today, it was his use of split screen in one of his earliest and best-known works, known in English as The Four Troublesome Heads, that many aspiring film students are still taught today. While at first split screen was used for illusion, soon many filmmakers made it front and center as a stylistic choice for narrative storytelling. Whether to convey a conversation across distances, such as talking on the telephone or working around censorship codes with Michael Gordon's 1959 film Pillow Talk, where the use of split screen gave the illusion of the characters sharing a bath and a bed without actually showing such scandalous acts, split screen became commonplace in films across genres. There are many lists that talk about the best use of split screen in cinema, and nearly every single one includes 500 Days of Summer. In fact, the expectation versus reality scene has become the most iconic scene in the entire film. But what makes it so memorable? Let's take a look. Before we get into this scene, and for those who haven't watched the film, let's talk a little bit about the context, as that's part of what makes it so effective. The story follows Tom on his pursuit of Summer, their connection, the emotional roller coaster of dating, and the ultimate ending of their relationship, based solely on Summer's lukewarm feelings and unwant to commit to Tom. When this scene takes place, Tom and Summer are already broken up, with Tom still struggling to understand what went wrong. They see each other again at a coworker's wedding, and from Tom's perspective, rekindle their romance, alighting a spark of hope in Tom. When Summer invites him to a party at her place, he believes this will reignite their relationship. There are many ways to use split screen effectively in film, but here are 4 reasons why it works so well in 500 Days of Summer. Number 1, planning. The pre-production effort paid off. While I have been guilty of adding last-minute split screen in post-production, the effect is always more impactful when the decision is made during production. In watching the scene, it's clear that the entire sequence was shot with split screen in mind, from the blocking to set design to the framing of every shot. In the audio commentary, director Mark Webb, screenwriters Michael Weber and Scott Neustadter, and actor Joseph Gordon-Levitt all explain how much technical planning went into the sequence, remarking on how much physicality went into conveying the message without confusing the audience. They go on to explain how the sequence was thought out nearly a year before production, how to block the scene and have the actors move about the frame, down to the final door closing at the end, blending with the split screen sliding across the frame. The amount of planning that went into this scene is extremely apparent in the juxtaposition of the two sequences, with both their similarities and the stark differences. This is what makes it so effective. When watching the scene, there are numerous similarities in the environment and the set design, the outfit that Summer and Tom is wearing, as well as his ascent up the stairs. However, the only scene that goes exactly as planned is Summer opening the book. This is the only shot that we see that is identical between expectation and reality. Everything else, from her reaction to the gift, to the layout of the party, to her and Tom's interactions, are different than Tom expected. When it comes to the differences, this is where we notice just how much thought was put into expectation versus reality. You can notice small set design differences. The expectation scene is a bit cleaner, there's fresh flowers about, whereas the reality shows beer bottles, a little bit of mess, and a lack of fresh flowers, which is probably a lot more realistic to how Summer would live and throw a party. The shots are tighter and more intimate in expectation. The party also all acknowledges Tom all at once, and he seems to be the center of attention. However, reality shows people more sprawled out, all in their own little world and having their own conversations. This conveys Tom's distance from Summer's world, as well as shows a more accurate representation of what would happen. The final difference between expectation and reality is Tom is with Summer nearly every second of expectation. However, he is on his own in nearly every frame of reality, culminating in the shot where he is entirely on his own, juxtaposed with his expectation of having his own little private conversation with Summer while the party happens behind them. While some very memorable scenes in films come from unscripted moments or off-the-cuff creativity in the editing bay, forethought is nearly always rewarded when it comes to post-production. Planning for an effect like split screen is what can take an okay sequence and turn it into the most iconic moment in the entire film. The next element we want to look at is necessity. Would the scene have been effective without the use of split screen? With any stylistic choice, it's important to ask the question, could this scene be told as effectively without the special effect? Not every stylistic choice has to have meaning. Sometimes it can just be a cool shot and/or add to the atmosphere or tone of a film. For example, the Ocean's films. These films consistently use rapid split screens to show simultaneous events happening. While these sequences could have been done with simple jump cuts, the use of split screen adds to the overall tone of the film, a cool, sleek sequence that matches the cool, sleek entourage. These sequences, while cool, aren't necessarily the first thing people remember when they think about the Ocean's films. However, in 500 Days of Summer, could the same effect be achieved with jump cuts or sequential editing? Well, the short answer is no. Let's take a look at why. If the scene was done with jump cuts, the viewer would have been taken out of the moment every time it cut between scenes and needed to readjust to what they're viewing, rather than watching it play out in real time simultaneously. The quick cutting would have also changed the tone of the film. Quick cutting creates a state of agitation or anxiety, and this scene is much more emotional and longing. If shooting sequentially, the emotional gut punch would have been lost. Watching an entire scene play out, then watching the entire scene play out again, but slightly different, would have taken much longer, potentially losing the audience's attention span. Whether using jump cuts or sequential editing, distinguishing expectation from reality would have had to come down to lighting, color, costuming. By keeping every factor the same, except a few actions of the scene and some set design choices, it shows just how close Tom was to having the fairy tale ending he imagined, making the realization that it won't play out how he wants that much harder. As soon as Tom notices Summer showing off her ring, reality overtakes his expectations. Her engagement is the nail in the coffin for any expectation Tom has for Summer and him getting back together. Because the scene was displayed via split screen, the viewer is able to literally watch reality overtake expectation, hitting home that emotional feeling with a physical act. This imagery could only have been achieved using split screen. The next important factor is emotional impact. Did this touch a universal nerve that everyone can relate to? When using a stylistic device such as split screen, looking at the emotion being evoked is vital. This scene is looking at the notion of imagining a situation much different than it winds up playing out, which is universal. Every person has been there. Watching essentially what Tom planned out in his head versus what actually happens in real time evokes feelings of disappointment and sadness, as well as betrayal, even though it's not justified. How many times has someone else's expectations of us not aligned with our intentions or wants? The use of split screen also allows us to not only sympathize with Tom, but more importantly, empathize. Even though Tom didn't have any real reason to expect what he did of his interaction with Summer at her party, it still feels like a letdown when Summer doesn't act how he expects, and the party guests don't treat him like the main character. Speaking of main character, this scene also acts as commentary on how many of us can wind up viewing our experience as the main character of a movie, where we enter a party and expect our love interest to pay us all the attention. Every guest notices our presence, and our wants overtake others, such as Tom expecting him and Summer to leave the party to go hook up. This film turns this idea on its head, saying it's much more likely that everyone is in their own world, playing out their own movie, and that our love interest has their own wants and needs in a situation that may not play out how we want or expect. It provides a more realistic glimpse at how this scene would really play out versus a traditional romantic comedy. The final factor of what made this such an excellent use of split screen is that it is covering evergreen content, or continued relevance, in pop culture and in life. As mentioned earlier, split screen is an incredibly common storytelling device in filmmaking, and you've probably seen it many times over without really taking note of it. So why is this particular use so memorable? The concept of expectation versus reality is evergreen, meaning it's content that remains relevant regardless of the time frame. It's based entirely on a universal feeling, meaning it has the ability to land with every single viewer. This scene has also had continued relevance. 500 Days of Summer was released in 2009, over a decade ago, and well before social media really had a stronghold on everyday life. However, the concept of expectation versus reality could be seen as ahead of its time, as people today now use the trend of Instagram versus reality, or social media versus reality, or even posed and unposed, as a way to distinguish perceived narratives from what really happens. This concept further replicates the idea of split screen with pairing the pretty perfect image together with the harsh reality. Because this concept has only continued to grow in relevance, viewers are able to emotionally connect and seamlessly apply it to modern times, finding comfort in the relatable. Style for style's sake isn't necessarily a problem, but having a reason for the style can mean the difference between a cool shot and a memorable moment. By using split screen to not only tell an effective part of the story, but also emotionally connect with a universal feeling all audience members can relate to, this scene becomes one of the most iconic sequences in the entire film and in the romantic comedy genre as a whole. In an interview, Alan Edward Bell commented on editing, saying, "I'm in service of the story, of the characters, of the director, of the studio, of the audience, and of myself. As an editor, what I'm striving to do is get you to feel something." And that was Expectation versus Reality from 500 Days of Summer. In my opinion, one of the best uses of split screen in a film that I've ever seen. While I've used split screen many a time as a film editor, I have never seen a scene more perfectly executed via the stylistic device than they did. And I hope to one day find a reason to use it as impactfully as 500 Days did. As usual, I wanted to leave you with my comfort flick pick of the week, which is Friends with Kids. This is an underrated rom-com / rom-dram with a really stacked cast featuring Adam Scott, Maya Rudolph, Kristen Wiig, Jon Hamm, and Megan Fox. While it's a movie with a somewhat standard message, it has some really memorable scenes and some really great acting. It's about a group of adults who are transitioning into being friends with kids and all the good and the bad that goes with that. Check it out if you haven't already, or give it a rewatch if it's been a while. If you like what you saw here today, make sure to give this video a like and comment down below your favorite use of split screen. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay updated on more episodes as well as other content from our channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.